Here at Sbragia Family Vineyards in Dry Creek Valley. If you all are following us on Google Hangout, if you could just tweet us. The hashtag is DCV Blanc, Blanc with a U, and confirm that you're seeing our stream. That would be awesome. So I'm looking for some confirmation here that we are live. And our handle is going to be at Dry Creek Valley. And your handle is at Dry Creek Vineyard, no vowels. Anybody? Are we live? All right, I'm seeing some of those. Not seeing confirmation that we're live yet. But I am seeing all the activity happening on Twitter, and I'm seeing some of my favorite people out there. Melanie, we're remembering our last visit through Dallas as well, fondly. All right, I'm gonna assume that we are live and get started here. So we've got a really exciting lineup of 3 Dry Creek Valley Sauvignon Blancs. And like I said, we are here at one of the prettiest spots in Dry Creek Valley. We're all the way at the north end at Sbragia Winery. And you can't see what I'm seeing now, but we're basically looking out these big glass windows at the whole valley kind of stretched out on one side and the dam on the other side. So it's a pretty spectacular place to be broadcasting from. So thanks for joining us out there, wherever you are in your home, I assume. I'm going to introduce our 3 winemakers and owners of the wineries. We've got an interesting representation of all of the valley here, so we're going to give you a little bit of overview of where each of these wines is coming from. I do want to kind of give you a visual of the valley, though. Dry Creek Valley is 16 miles long by 2 miles wide, so we're really up here at the very top end, so you've got this very long, narrow valley. And these wines are sourced from kind of different locations throughout. So with that, I'm going to turn it over first to Emmett Reed at Gustafson, and he's going to introduce himself. You can tell us how long you've been at Gustafson and maybe a little just snippet about the winery.
Sure. Hello. I've been at Gustafson since 2007. I'm the winemaker and vineyard manager there. It was founded in 2004 by Dan Gustafson. And we've been making wine. It's an entirely estate project, 20 acres of vineyard, and we make all the wines right there on the property at 1,800 feet up on Skaggs Springs Road.
Got it. And then I have Tim Bell to your left with Dry Creek Vineyard.
Hello everyone, I'm Tim Bell. I'm the winemaker at Dry Creek Vineyard. We're a family-owned winery. We're the first new winery to be started since the end of Prohibition in Dry Creek Valley. And we're just a little bit outside of Hillsburg. And, first people plant Sauvignon Blanc. We've got a wine from the original Sauvignon Blanc vineyard right here.
Very cool. And then last but not least, we have Ed Sbragia, who is the owner and founder of Sbragia Family Vineyards. And not currently the winemaker, but the wine master, is that correct?
Yeah, my son is the winemaker. He does all the work. I take all the credit. But I just want to know why you look so good on this and I look so horrible.
I think it's all in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, well, so welcome to Sbragia Family Vineyards.
Thank you so much for having us here.
Mm-hmm.
So without further ado, we're going to kind of introduce you to the tasting lineup here. So we didn't really decide on this in any democratic fashion, but I'm going to start with Gustafson since it's closest to me. So if you want to get that open out there at home. Sauvignon Blanc is the signature white grape here in Dry Creek Valley. Doesn't mean we don't have others. There's plenty of Chardonnay planted, Viognier, little smattering of some other white wine grapes as well. But the region's really become known for Sauvignon Blanc, and I wonder if because David Stair was sort of the father of Sauvignon Blanc, if you will, in Dry Creek Valley, if you could kind of give us a little overview about why you think it does so well here and why this is a great reason for Sauvignon Blanc.
Yeah, it was probably kind of a happy accident that he found a grape that did so well. I know back in 1972 when David Starr was starting the winery, he was advised not to collect Sauvignon Blanc and that it wouldn't be successful. But I asked him one time why did he do that, and he said, well, I was just bullheaded enough that I wanted to do what I wanted to do. And he liked the wines of the Loire Valley, so that was kind of his inspiration. I think we happen to have just the right amount of heat. I think you get a little bit of heat to get some nice fresh flavors, but every evening, a lot of times we get this really nice blanket of fog that comes in from the south end of the valley, and kind of just puts a little blanket that keeps the temperatures kind of even, and then it burns off, probably most times. And I think it works out well for the variety.
Mm-hmm. So is that different from other? I mean, we in Wine Geek speak, we talk about the diurnal temperature shift, right? And so is that something that most grapes thrive in, or is it kind of special to create certain characteristics in wine?
I would say it depends on the variety, but a lot of our Sauvignon Blanc is planted probably more, I would say, in the valley to south end of the valley, which is a little cooler. We're kind of bordering on Russian River, so a little bit cooler climate there. There's definitely a temperature gradient as you go up north in the valley. The exception might be like Gustafson, where they're on the mountains and they've got kind of their own climate there as well.
So if you guys want to log into our website, drycreekvalley.org, sorry, as I look to my person here who knows everything, you can find a map on the website that actually will kind of give you, a visual of the valley as we're talking about it. So why don't we get some wine in our glass here, because that always lubricates conversation, and I think everybody out there is, there's people in different time zones, and some people have been waiting a long time past 5 o'clock. So let's get going. Yes. If you want to jump here, we'll all start with Gustafson. Okay, so this is
really eager.
Heritage Tree Vineyard.
Yes.
Okay, and so now we're talking about up at Gustafson. So can you tell us what that means for people who aren't here? Try to describe it for like a radio audience.
So the vineyard's located at about, this vineyard in particular is about 1,500 feet above sea level. It's sort of on a northeastern facing slope. The main difference, interesting that you brought up diurnal, is at that elevation, you're above the fog, so you don't get that cooling influence. Mm-hmm. But we also have the inversion, which we don't get as hot in the middle of the day or quite as cold at night. We run usually about 6 to 8 degrees different, either cooler in the middle of the day or warmer at night. And that really allows the grapevines to not overstress in the heat, but then they also don't slow down as much at night. It doesn't drop down in the 50s, it stays more in the 60s and 70s. And they pace themselves through it. It makes for some different characteristics in the wine, I think, than you get from the really warm sections of the valley. It also makes for different kinds of wine that you can grow. So
you're up at 1,500 feet, and how about your vineyards, elevation-wise?
Yeah, we're on basically on Valley Floor, kind of right by Dry Creek, so I don't know, maybe 200, 300 feet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're about 200-300. We're at the end of the valley just before it drops into the Russian River, so it's pretty cold.
Okay, so that's a significant elevation difference.
yes.
And you're up near Lake Sonoma. How close are you to the lake, and are you getting that kind of marine influence?
We're close to the lake in the sense that it's about 3 miles from as the crow flies, but we don't really get any marine influence from the lake. What we do get is a cooling factor actually from the coast, which is, we're sort of at the highest point of that ridge. It goes up to about 2,000 feet just past us, but every afternoon, really kind of cool air from the coast comes over that ridge line, and we experience that, which definitely helps lower the daytime temperature, and helps create kind of the more elegant flavors that you look for in Sauvignon Blanc.
So what are you getting from this wine?
Well, our Sauvignon Blanc, we do the stainless steel fermentation, so you get some really nice crisp components to it. Then post-fermentation, I put it in French oak for between 2 and 4 months kind of depended on the varietal. It was the season, it was 3 months in 2013, which is quite a rare year.
New French?
No, 20% new French. And they're water bent barrels, so you don't get that big, heavy toasted flavor that you get with, they're still toasted, but they're bent with water or more water in the toasting process, which kind of helps mellow the real creaminess. Just a little nuance to try and create a slightly different component in the wine.
Excellent. How are you guys liking the wine out there? I'm just looking for some kind of engagement here. So we've actually got a question here. Bella McDowell, her handle is @wine&good-food. She's asking how many acres of Sauv Blanc are actually planted in Dry Creek Valley, and I think we found that it's something around 530 acres, give or take a few.
Yeah, there's about 9,000 acres total, I think maybe even more now.
Right.
It's about the same, so it's a small.
Yeah. Primarily, we've got Zinfandel and Cabernet Sauvignon taking up most of the acreage here, and then, kind of a wide variety of other grapes planted in the valley. It's a very diverse AVA in terms of what we can grow here.
It's probably an equal amount of Chardonnay.
As Sauv Blanc,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, and I would say that, we don't claim Chardonnay as our signature, not because we don't make excellent Chardonnay on par with any other region, but there's so many places that kind of have a stick in the sand about being a Chardonnay region that we'll just sort of let them own it, and then the people that are in the know buy up all our Chardonnay.
I'll claim it. I'll claim it. Dry Creek rules.
All right. So with that, we can move on to Tim Bell, and maybe he can introduce us to this next beautiful Sauv Blanc that we have.
I want to pour this out.
I know. Well, down the hatch or
Nice texture.
in
Now,
the.
by the time we're done, we're talking in tongues.
Well, this is our DCB3 Sauvignon Blanc 2013 vintage. And I think I alluded to the fact this was the original Sauvignon Blanc vineyard for the winery and first planting that we know of in Dry Creek Valley. So it's kind of, it has a lot of history for us, and it's a pretty special vineyard. It's right behind the winery on the other side of Dry Creek. So the winery is on the east side, vineyards are directly on the west side. And the majority of the vineyard is planted to clone one, but we've done some new planting in recent years. So this was the first vintage where we got a little bit of fruit from some of the new planting. So about 5% of this is clone 21, which is a different new clone for us.
Can I ask you about clones? Particularly with Sauvignon Blanc, because the only clones that I know of are the Muscat clone, right? And then everything else that's non-Muscat. So for a non-grower geek like me, what can you tell me about clones?
Well, most of what you'll find out there in Sauvignon Blanc is clone 1. And I think sometimes people think because it's sort of more ubiquitous and kind of the original that, oh, there must be something newer and sexier. And there is some exciting other clones out there, like 530, for example, is one I've worked with that makes really nice wine. I love this gag, we do a little bit of that as well. But clone 1, I think, makes really beautiful wines, and it takes on characteristics of where it's grown. So different vineyards will give you different qualities in that, and how you look at the canopy and all that as well.
So you're saying that is sort of more ubiquitous, but is that just in Dry Creek Valley, or is that worldwide?
Well, throughout California.
And do you know, for example, in Sancerre, like what people are planting there? Do we have wood coming from?
Well, some of the over the last maybe 20 plus years, there's been kind of this influx of different French selections. So I don't know specifically which ones might be coming from. You guys know, might be coming from that region, but I would imagine that some of those are coming from there, and from the Bordeaux region as well.
Okay. So we have a question here about the DCB3, what that stands for?
I think it was just kind of an accounting thing, or back in.
Well, that's not. It comes something better.
Okay, well, we make something up.
There were 3 women that went out and planted the vineyard,
No,
and then their names were
we thought-
Daisy.
Yes, we thought it was more of a vision of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, right? So, it's a blessed Trinity. So it's actually funny that it's 3, but it's our original vineyard. There actually was a BCB1, but it wasn't the original vineyard. But I think it was maybe sort of in the tradition of like BV too, like they just had BV in the number for a lot of their vineyards. So kind of an old school way to name your vineyard.
And somebody's asking, is this true? Are you using the Muscat clones up at your vineyard?
Yes,
Okay.
it's a field blend. We grow about 200 vines of Muscat right in the same vineyard as the Sauvignon Blanc. And we harvest them about 3 or 4 days apart on a given year. And the Muscat really brings a very interesting quality to the wine. It's too small of a planting to really kind of separate out entirely and ferment separately. So it'll probably always end up in the Sauvignon Blanc. But it gives it a very interesting quality. We were actually kind of talking about that before we got started. It's something that's kind of hard to put a finger on. People say peach a lot. What we hear very often. I feel like it gives it just kind of a texture too. It's a little more weight to the palate.
Sometimes I get almost like a kind of a waxy white flower thing.
It is an aromatic involved.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And it tends to be a little bit lower acidity typically than most other Sauvignon Blanc clones. So maybe kind of be
So
something you
soft.
can balance out high acid.
So stylistically, between these 2 wines, how would you describe the difference? Now that you see, I'm testing your taste memory because you don't have that in your glass anymore.
No, the Gustafson, I think you definitely get just that little bit of subtle barrel influence, and it brings a little richness to the wine. Our DCE3 is fairly crisp. It's all stainless steel fermentation, no alcohol, and so that really brings a nice freshness to the wine. To me, I kind of get the finish some nice lingering flavors. It's like tangerine, maybe some ripe lemon, and it's this vineyard too. When it ages, we have a kind of a library of wines, and it kind of develops what some people describe sort of as an old Italian belly kind of smell, maybe some other interesting secondary sort of aroma development there. It's pretty.
See, that makes me think of sausage and provolone, not that. Which
That's
normally I
the
would.
salami, right?
Yeah.
But you have to experience it, but it's a good thing.
Okay. So how do you think this particular wine is expressive of the vineyard itself, of that particular little slice of heaven?
Yeah, that vineyard has tended to be particularly herbal, and in fact, in our early days, we used to pick it at probably lower ripeness. 2013 vintage in particular, it seemed like flavor was kind of lagging for a while, so we actually picked it a little riper than we typically would. That vineyard, its hallmarks are typically very crisp acids, a little bit of, let's say, jalapeno pepper, subtle flavor in the background, along with some nice citrus fruits.
I'm getting questions about wine pairings for these 2 wines. What would you pair with yours?
The Sauvignon Blanc we actually pair with crab salad is one of the things that we love to do. Dungeness is a local treat here, and it's in season usually, kind of when we release this wine. So it's something that we do, just a little bit of, you don't want to go too heavy on the herbs because they can overpower the wine, but just a little cilantro, a little crab, and just great pairing.
We always like oysters with our whites, but the other thing I was thinking in tasting this is kind of a simply prepared like maybe pan-seared scallop in a dish. That's nice pizza.
Mine.
Which I love.
Let's see. We had a couple more questions here. So we talked about terroir a little bit. So this is a very general question, but California Sauvignon Blanc, is there such a thing, right? Versus French Sauvignon Blanc. Very, very general broad strokes differences?
Impossible.
Impossible, right?
I mean, if you look at French, would you compare a Macron to a white Burgundy? No. Would you compare a dry creek wine to a Lodi Sauvignon? No. They're all very different. Each area has its own characteristics and vive la différence.
Is there a characteristic that you would say is something that, you know, if you're a Master Somm candidate and you're trying to ferret out what is a Dry Creek Valley Sauvignon Blanc, what would they be looking for?
But if you taste these three, and you haven't tasted mine yet, but I think you find that we have a little more tropical fruit, a little more grapefruit characteristics, even up on the mountain. I think the wines are supple. At the same time, they have really good backbone, great acid structure, and they're relatively long lived for Sauvignon Blanc. So it's really good. I'm just tasting in 2008 right now. It's really gorgeous. So I think it is the greatest place on the planet.
All right.
Now,
Well, with that note, now we have to move on to your wine.
drank all the dry creek. And they maybe put the best one out. I like that.
That's okay. I'm just here for color commentary. All right, so tell us about this wine, where it's from.
Well, I talked my dad into planting Sauvignon Blanc. I worked for a little winery in Napa Valley, that other place, for a long time, over 30
Little
years.
winery.
Yeah, and there was an Alexander Valley Sauvignon Blanc, in the location where Hannah is now, that I got one of my friends, the Bells, who live in Dry Creek Valley, to clone over to AXR1, which I still have some of that rootstock, which is the one that put us under phylloxera, but I'm on sandy, right next to the river, so it's staying alive. We planted it in 1984, and we're making, basically selling the grapes until I started this winery in 2002.
Your dad was a grower.
We've been growers for about 100 years. And it's kind of nice because we finally have our name on a building. Like you were saying, we're right next to the Warm Springs Dam. We have the best dam view around. Anyway, cheers.
Cheers. Salud.
This is a wine that I will always drink because it's my wife's favorite. I used to have a little Muscat I blended into it, but this is from the home ranch. It is on Vineyard, very close to where the Russian River and the Dry Creek come together. That's where I grew up, at the southern end of the valley, where Dry Creek dumps into the Russian River. You think about being only about 20 miles as the crow flies from the ocean. We have an ocean that's 52 degrees. That's pretty good heat sink. So every night, even if it's 90 degrees here, it gets down to 52 degrees in the valley floor. So this vineyard produces grapes with very low pH and very high acids. I mean, if anybody cares, it's over 8 grams of acid. So I do an arrested fermentation, and this is solely stainless steel. I used to put it in barrels, but I decided I'd rather just do stainless steel, and I got some little tanks so I can keep it separate. And so I stopped the fermentation when I think it tastes good. This one turned out pretty well for me.
So both stainless steel here and then 20% wood.
Yes.
Right?
So it's crushed in basically early September. This year we'll probably do something in August. And it was put in a bottle somewhere, and this year it's in March.
Okay, so you just mentioned something about harvest this year. Are we looking at another early harvest?
Well, I think This one's-
too early to say, but
This one is gonna be.
It's definitely looking that way.
The last ones weren't really early. They were probably almost right after Labor Day, but this one I think will probably be. Over the years, I've seen harvests, my earliest one was August 2nd. That was really early. This one will probably be the last week in August.
Maybe it could be a little earlier.
Maybe earlier. It's at least 2 weeks.
so 2 questions. One, just how many cases of each of these wines are you making, if you don't mind sharing?
We do about 350 cases for this one.
Is it available in the broad market or just at the wine?
Wine club at the winery.
I'm from the wine.
The DCB3 is about 400 cases, and it's direct sales on the website.
In 2013, it's available in the market, but 2014 won't be available here.
Oh, so only 14. So 14's only
From
here.
now on, it'll only be available at Wine Club.
Oh. So get the 13 while you can, in other words, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then, let's see, question about how easy or difficult Sauv Blanc is to make versus other styles of wine that you make. Very broad question.
Usually, for me at least, Sauvignon Blanc is always the first thing that we pick. So it's kind of got the focus and you're not running a million different directions in the middle of harvest trying to make a bunch of different wines. We ferment very cool. So when you're controlling the temperature in that sense, the fermentation wants to heat up. So when you're keeping it down, you always have that kind of safety lever of, well, if I'll warm it up and it will continue. So it's, for me at least, it's definitely on the easier side to make compared to some of the reds where you're trying to cool them down and rein them in. So I would say not difficult, but yeah, on the easier side. So
I'd say for me, the most in my, well, we basically ferment stainless steel. It's a pretty simple, straightforward process. But where I think a lot of the work happens is really in the vineyard. That's where we're really creating flavors. And so, I feel like I need to spend a lot of time out there tasting and really communicating with the vineyard crew too about what kind of light exposure or lack thereof. Sometimes a little bit of leaf, sometimes you get more, particularly with Sauvignon Muscat, for example, you want to get more light in there, really accentuate those tropical flavors. So that's where a lot of the work is done.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I mean, I kind of describe ours as having this tropical grapefruit character. And I think Dry Creek in general has that character. To me, compared to maybe some of the southern Napa Valley wines that were pretty very green and grassy, I'm not a big fan of that. So I would like what we make here.
Is that like New Zealand style?
Well, no,
Here.
those are even different. There's a different characteristic. I wouldn't call them grassy. They're just gooseberry or cornflower, things that we don't associate.
Room flower.
Eat and drink.
Hey,
Whatever that
that's a
is.
new one.
It's little white flowers that
Okay.
grow in the spring that you can really smell. This fragrant character. It's just a different area. I think we get warm afternoons and very cold nights.
Right.
So, it's a good way.
they're still cool. It's a little bit
Yeah.
different. And to touch on what you were saying, you really do influence the character of the wine by the amount of light exposure that you give the grapes. I feel like that's instrumental. And when the canopy is really closed up, you get a lot more of the jalapenos, sort of spicy components. And if you really clear out, we tend to strip out the fruit zone of these, mostly to deal with the fact that we don't get as warm as the valley floor. It's definitely cooler in the middle of the day. And that allows us to get those tropical flavors, which are kind of the hallmarks of Dry Creek wines, or Dry Creek Sauvignon Blanc. That really can influence the components there. Is the amount of light exposure on the actual fruit.
I agree, because we used to grow it in a bush, California squash. Now we have vertical juice machining. So we basically have a fruiting zone and head above. And being able to leave the arms down if you need to, or bring it up, take the leaves off, leave them on, gives you control to make a more fruit-driven wine versus a grassy wine. I think Southern Blanc is, for me, much better.
So Todd at Wine Compass is saying there's a noticeable lift in the mid palate, and is asking if that's inherent to this particular region or the grape or the winemaking style. What would you attribute that to?
I would say, we've drawn a lot of different vineyards from all over the valley, and even though Sauvignon Blanc as a variety tends to be light and crisp, I do see a sort of a little bit of a creaminess a lot of times in the fruit that we get.
I agree.
So food pairings for your Sauvignon Blanc, Ed?
Well, he mentioned scallops, you take a little bit of the wine, a little olive oil, a little garlic, you start it going and then squeeze some lime in it, and you have a plate and a glass of wine.
Mm-hmm.
You stick it in there and you put it on a plate with a little bit of lemon in it and the glass of wine in a plate. And
Happiness.
Grilled scallop, and it's a great way to start it. Right around the grill.
So I have a couple of kind of geekier questions. So I want to talk about soils a little bit. So can you, and I know that you're the winemakers, and I don't know how much you're into the soils of these vineyards, so forgive me if I'm wading you into grower territory here, but can you tell me a little bit about kind of the soil profile of the vineyard where these grapes are sourced from, and maybe, elucidate like how that impacts the differences between the wines?
Certainly. So the vineyard site here is kind of a bowl. It is Josephine loam, which is one of the 3 soil profiles that we have up here.
And what is that like?
It's a red, very well drained soil. It's got a clay component in the topsoil, and then at about 2.5 feet, you move to about 75% gravel. So it's very well drained, very. It's loose on the top. It's almost powdery. It kind of looks like cinnamon.
Okay.
But as you get lower, it turns more into heavier rocks. But the thing about this little bowl is they used to farm sheep there, so that there's a very organic component in the middle where the sheep were for a very long time.
Right.
So when we put the vineyard in, we noticed that there was sort of this lower point where the vines were 9 feet tall and very, vigorous, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
So we farm that little section a little differently than we do the sides, where there isn't quite as much of the organic matter.
Mm-hmm.
So those 2 components have allowed us really to fertilize a little less,
Right.
and because it's there. But you get a really nice kind of, I hate to say minerality because it's such a broad kind of encompassing thing, but you get a nice complexion from the soil there.
Well, our soil is pretty different from that. It's a yellow series. It's a sandy loam. It's right next to Dry Creek, so I'm sure that over the years there's been some flooding and depositing of silt and soil there. It's fairly fertile soil, fairly deep. And Sauvignon Blanc, I think, can do really well in those kind of situations, and partly to deal with that fertility too. A lot of the vineyard is on a escarpment. So it's got canopy going up and then some shoots going down as well. We kept the more growing points on the vine to kind of, so it doesn't, become 9 feet tall.
Mm-hmm.
And it works out well. I think that particular vineyard site too, because of the fertility and especially when it was more confined in the, kind of more of a bush or a sprawl, it would be a really herbal, kind of grassy or more bell pepper kind of site. But with the shoot position that we've got, we get a nice balance of those qualities. So a little bit of pepper, but
Well, there's a dam right here, and there's a reason. This whole valley is flood. I lived in a house, so my son moved in 10 miles away. And being a child, I remember my dad opening the front door and back door, and it's 3 feet off the ground and 6 inches of water flowing through. So there was floods here. And this was in the 1900s. I mean,
And when did they build the dam?
excuse me?
What year did they build the dam?
1982, 1985. So I think predominantly we have rocky clay rock, and the soils are very, but then the river probably changed course off places. So you have places where it's gravel bed. And on the hillsides, there's more rock. If you go down, you get more clay. Of course, the river is almost all run. So the vigorous, I think in some places they're vigorous soils, but I think nutrient-wise, the vines grow, especially where we train them now, that we get good vigor in sauvignon blanc. And with the way we can adjust the way they get soil radiation, I think that we get the flavors that we want.
So we've got a couple of different vintages here, right? We're 2013, you're 13 as well, yeah, and then 14 on
And
the
14.
Sbragia, right? So what was the difference between those two growing seasons? I know
As
we've
I
had
recall-
like 3 years of amazing vintages.
Yeah, preceded by 3 years that were really shocking.
Right.
Yeah.
Wait, those wines are still in the market. Watch out.
No. Hey guys, we put them in the bottle because they were good.
Yeah.
They were difficult as growers.
Right.
It was a tough thing to grow, but the wines I found turned out
That's what we get, and, you know.
There
careful
was just
selection.
less of it.
Well, we made less too,
Yeah.
and then, but, you know, like 2011, for example, it was low yield Sauvignon Blanc, low yield Cab, and then we had to sort through that and make even less because we wanted quality.
Mhm.
2014, as I recall, was a little earlier harvest than 2013.
Mhm.
And actually, a lot of the 2014, for example, I picked up lower sugar levels than I typically have in the last several years because the flavor was there. But 2013, it seemed like it was kind of lagging a little bit. So in some cases, I waited a bit longer.
So what was your biggest challenge in making this particular wine?
You know, really just trying to stay true to the style. This is such an old friend to a lot of our wine club members, and they have particular expectation of what they want from this wine. They're very loyal, and so you know, trying to just stay with what the vineyard, you know, really wants to give, and not get in the way with too much technique.
And you make other styles of Sauvignon Blanc too, is that correct?
We do. We have several different bottles that we do it in all Muscat bottling, and then available nationally. We have a Blanc, which is kind of a blend of Russian River and Dry Creek Valley fruit. Tends to be sort of a less ripe end of Sauvignon Blanc. And then we do a Dry Creek Sauvignon Blanc that is you know, usually about 10 to 15% Muscat in there. It's a riper style. Kind of reflects really the nice, beautiful fruit of our area.
So can we talk about Fumé Blanc? What is Fumé Blanc?
Well,
It was a wine that Mr. Mandani made famous, and we all jumped on the bandwagon. It's somewhere around,
It's Sauvignon
Early-
Blanc, yes?
yeah, it always has been.
Right.
Somewhere in the late 80s, early 90s, we all started calling it Sauvignon Blanc.
And Fumé because we thought Americans couldn't pronounce Sauvignon? Or
Fumé, which is a Sauvignon Blanc in Europe, we kind
so I've
of
heard
modulated that.
that sometimes Fumé Blanc denotes of Sauv Blanc that's put in oak for some time. Is there any truth to that? Does anybody adhere to that, or is Fumé just another? I mean, as a marketer, I say,
I
but
think
kind
it's
of
a
marketing
nom
term.
de plume right now.
A nom de plume.
I also think that supposedly was the style that Mondani made, was they added the oak to it. And that
Yeah,
flavor
yes.
had been attached to it. So,
yeah, in our case, we don't use oak in Fumé Blanc, but there is some
Yeah, both sides.
expectation
Yeah.
of that.
Right.
But it really was, I think, just kind of a product of the time that when David Stair was making that wine, people were calling it Fumé Blanc, and it seemed like it had more market value than Sauvignon Blanc. And for us, we've been making it for years, so now it's kind of, we were thinking about changing it a few years ago, but kind of got pushed back because it's our single biggest wine that we make.
And you guys,
People know us for it.
people know you.
Yeah.
So how do you make a decision about whether or not you're going to put oak on your wine?
from the beginning, it was a decision that the owner wanted to do. I guess you could say he liked the singer style. and we stuck with it.
My style.
But,
Maybe
Now,
no.
different, but they started.
Right.
Yes.
So they
Yep.
they own it.
Ultimately, the owner decided he wanted the owner, and we've stuck with it because, as he said, it's a friend to our wine club members. It's something that they've come to expect in the wine, and it gives us a little bit of a difference. And when there's a lot of amazing Sauvignon Blancs in Dry Creek Valley, we're trying to tweak it a little bit just to stay a little more different. So.
And so Ed, you used to use Oban and are no longer, so
Well,
how does that?
in this wine, I didn't. The Reds came in and ran out. Still, so
Practical
it
decision.
went into old wood, and then that changed it and rounded it out. So the 14 is the first time I've been able to do what I wanted to do. Keep it in stainless steel because I got some little tanks to put it away. Over the years, working that other valley, I've made total go from that malolactic, blended with Sauvignon and Sauvignon Blanc, made like a white Bordeaux. I think because of the clarity of the varietal here in the styles that we're making more attuned to really spotlight the quality of the fruit. And that's what we're trying. That's the winemaker's job, is to shepherd that grape from the vine to the bottle and keep intact what Mother Nature did.
Is anybody doing Sauvignon here in Dry Creek? There's a little bit of it grown, I know, but is anybody blending it in with the Sauv Blanc?
Dr. Gibson probably would.
Yeah, I can't think of anyone.
We have a little bit behind the winery, and we may find a home for it here or there, but basically a lot of times we kind of look at the late harvest. We've got a small plant, so we want to send right next to each other. And so we're always hoping, in one case we're hoping for some more.
Right. Well, actually, I wanted to talk a little bit about Bacchus wine. Yeah, so if you know Sauternes, then you know Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon as the Bacchus wine. Are we doing any Bacchus wines in Dry Creek? Is it even possible with our climate and terroir?
We do a bottling occasionally called Soleil, and actually,
Is it Bacchus or is it?
yeah, well, a little both, but we really want to get some Bacchus going. And we're actually bottling tomorrow, the 25th vintage of that, Canadian barrels for a while. So we did try to sort of influence the canopy management, try to encourage a little bit of mold, and then we just waited.
Wait, so can you explain in case there's people watching, because this is on Twitter and YouTube and people might not know what you mean by why you would want mold to be on your grapes?
Oh, yeah, so the Travis mold is the key component of Sauternes, right? It's the noble rock that concentrates the fruit, and
Kind of turns it into raisins.
yeah, you'll get a little bit of fuzz kind of around where the berry attaches to the stem, and then sometimes it takes over more, and the fruit gets more gold color, and it's one of the instances where when you taste it on the vine, it just tastes very much like the wine it tastes.
And it's also a little bit like honey. Yeah. And the thing about it is it's concentrated without ever seeing a lot of heat.
Right.
So it's a pure flavor.
And so what is the difference between that and then a late harvest?
They tend to get maybe a little more raisin quality in the late harvest. Because it
They're
is
just letting it hang on.
heat and dehydration.
Okay. So we're hoping for mold or not?
And one false
Probably in general for our wines in the valley, not.
Not most of us are.
Right.
I used to make one called night. So that we were happy with it. It's not something you always
Right.
yeah.
So is there a particular area or, and I know we've got kind of some different parts of the Dry Creek Valley where we're growing Sauv Blanc, but, hillsides versus what does Sauv Blanc need compared to some of the, like, let's say Cab and Riesling, since those are most planted varieties. What does Sauv Blanc need instead of that in terms of like where it's planted?
I'd say generally, if you compare it to cabins, then probably less heat. I mean, cabins in want it really hot usually, and to get those big red fruit flavors. The Sbragia, it does want heat. I mean, it's not, you don't want it cold, but it's an elegant white. Usually the aromatic whites, the elegant whites, you want them a little cooler. They kind of preserve that elegance. I would say a little cool.
I think with the tropical fruit characters, I think you need some heat. It preserves the structure, the acidity, and not cold.
And our Zin, what are we doing with Zin that we're not doing with Sauvignon? Since those are kind of our two flags in Vineyard Valley.
Say a lot of it is that where you're growing it, you tend to not grow in bigger sites where you might grow Sauvignon Blanc. And then just, at least in our case, for Sauvignon Blanc, you tend to want some sort of herbaceous qualities, particularly in our Vineyard Blanc, along with the nice fruit that we get here. So we don't do a lot of light exposure or a lot of leafing. Get a lot of light in for the vineyards that are targeted for that wine. So, Zinfandel, definitely want to get more light exposure and good air circulation to prevent mold as well, but just really develop good color and flavor. Great.
I mean, if you look at Zin right outside the window here, you're on the tail end of the director's bench, or the beginning of the director's bench. So a lot of the Zins are planted on the eastern slopes, facing west. They see the sunset every night, and they get a little more exposure.
Got it. We have a question from Martin Redmond about closures. All of these wines are under cork. Why are we doing cork instead of screw cap? We're seeing a lot of screw caps for whites, worldwide. Any particular reason?
I just switched to screw cap actually on the 14s. So this is our last year of cork. I think for at least for me, the screw caps, at least the technology was where we were comfortable with it finally. Very early on, it was something there was a lot of concerns about the oxygen transmission and damage to the wines in that regard in terms of production. So we got comfortable with where the technology was and we decided to switch to it next year.
Or ease, or because
we always want to make it easier for the consumer, and it is a little less expensive. And with a short-lived wine, it's not something that you're looking at aging this wine for 15 years. So it's not something that you're terribly worried about after the first 3 or 4 years of the wine.
Okay.
Well, we use screw caps on our Chenin Blanc or Vineyard Blanc and our Sauvignon Blanc that are all national distribution. Some of these more limited bottlings like this BC3 we use cork, and I actually think for this wine, because we like aging it for a long period, it might be.
You do age it.
Yeah, and we do a little bit of a delayed release on it too. So I think it may benefit that wine a little bit, but there's been a lot of advances in the screw cap liners, which is kind of where your seal is made, and you can kind of dial in your oxygen permeability now too. So we're really happy with it. I think for the wines that we're using it on, it really preserves the fresh fruit flavors, and it's great. You don't have to have corkscrew. I love it. You're ready to go.
Picnic, poolside. As a former bartender, please give me screw caps because I don't have time to mess with this.
I started with a glass stopper.
A glass stopper.
Yeah, like a bar top. Then I went to screw cap, and I've gone back to cork. And of course, I've done it for 30 years. I know what they do. I'm going to stay with cork. And cork is much better than these. They've done a lot about sure cork comes.
Yeah. And you were talking about aging Sauvignon
Yeah,
as well.
they age nicely. So, I'm making a small amount now, and I put it in the closure I understand the best.
So how long do you think these wines could lay on for?
Well, the problem is people really don't understand Sauvignon Blanc in terms of as it ages, because it gets kind of oily and it has one old blood, like Riesling and stuff, it has a little bit of that in it, so it gets that kind of terpene,
which I think is really
Sorry.
cool.
Well, I like that
Yeah.
in the old Riesling, so somebody wants to do the same thing. Then they get golden. I tend to like them then. Nobody else does, but I mean, guess who
I'll
I'm
come
making this
over.
wine for? Me, first.
And me.
And then hopefully somebody else will.
Right.
Yeah, I would easily be comfortable laying this one down, at least 10-ish years, but
10
probably
years.
longer,
It's a long time.
It's
good.
But, with particularly these, like that one too, it's got really good acid, so I think low pH is going to probably age really well.
Have you guys ever had, I want to know what's the oldest Sauvignon you've ever had in terms of, how many years past vintage was it? Curious.
I just bought a bottle of something I used to call the Peruvian. It's a Belf mid, like the whole fan mango, solid bottle in 91.
91.
It was gorgeous.
I think I had a 91, but that was back in 05, so
This was 2 weeks.
that's pretty darn good.
But again, it's an acquired taste. I mean, it's something. It's like an old shark. Not the same as the young shark.
I've tasted our Cabernet Blancs back to the early 70s, and I just remember, I think it was 1977, really being a standout. It had aged real nice, and it's still, certainly had taken on some age characteristics, but it had still a good acidity and some nice freshness to it.
Second year of the drought. The last 3 droughts ago.
So how are we seeing the drought affecting winemaking? That was one of the questions we had earlier. Now we're in third, fourth year of the drought. So how is it changing or affecting what you guys are doing in the vineyards?
Well, we're trying to water less. That's kind of always been our goal there, is to get to a dry farm state. It's tough on the hillsides. There's not a ton of water up there to begin with, although we do get more rain as the clouds move over the coast, they can dump on us a little bit more. I think it's forcing people mostly to watch how much water they're putting on and to kind of question in the vineyards, do I really need to put this much, or can I get away with a little bit less? So it's a good direction I think to head in.
Yeah, I would say kind of the same thing as, paying a lot more attention to how much do we really need to water. The industry as a whole has kind of been trending to less and less anyway over the years. But just really paying attention and in some areas, well, we've got one vineyard site that relies entirely on runoff to fill the reservoirs. So, last year we had to really cross out the water. But in other areas,
Did you make it all the way?
just. Yeah. But we learned a lot of valuable information from that last year. In other areas, I think we maybe haven't necessarily seen a definite effect yet, but if it keeps up, it's going to matter.
Mine's dry farm, so.
So,
It's doing, it is what it is, and it seems to be doing fine. I think what I've noticed is in drought times, the lines go deep, or in the river valley.
Mhm.
So the water's coming off the hills, coming down, we have less. The tops of the hills are a little bit more, they seem to be a little more slowing down in terms of growth, but I don't see it. We had a lot of rain in the first part of this year, so it was almost normal until now. It's, we're at half.
So is that sort of the silver lining of the drought? Is it then the vineyards that make it, hopefully all of them, then they've got these deeper roots and maybe the wines that are coming out later are a little more complex as a result?
Yeah, I think so. I think also that, you might get smaller yields and you may have to drop fruit to get it right. You have to actually, as you prune, when you go through a vine, some have more vigor, some have less. They're actually all individuals are in there.
Yeah.
So there's really no normality in it. You take each one as the best way to grow that particular plant.
Well, if you guys wanted normality, I would assume you would have been some kind of bureaucrats, right, and not farmers and winemakers. We don't have that in our world.
It's funny when you've been in this business this long. I've been in it over 40 years. I've only had 40 chances to make
Right.
You only get one chance a year.
Have you seen a drought like this before?
There was one in the 70s, one in the 80s. The 80s was about 3 years, the 70s about 3 years. This is 4. So I haven't seen this.
Well, stay tuned. So with that, I'm gonna see if we've got any last questions here. Let's see. So Randy's had a Sauv Blanc that was 5 years old. Still not in the territory of 30, what? 91? Oh, wow, 35 years old, gosh. Trying to do math on camera. I'm a communicator. Okay, it looks like we've kind of addressed most people's questions, so I just want to really thank you guys for tuning in and for participating with us, and especially for kind of rolling with the changes as we switched over to Hangouts instead of Ustream, and hopefully Ustream gets up again one of these days. Also want to really thank these 3 guys. Thank you, Emmett, Tim, and Ed, and we'll see you next time from the Wine Growers of Dry Creek Valley. Ciao.
Cheers.